quality property management. Building Green is presenting this webinar on behalf of the Energy Network, which is a local government organization created by the CPUC that provides resources and assistance to homeowners, businesses, and public agencies planning energy efficiency upgrades serving the Southern California region specifically. Some of these services include community education and outreach, such as these webinars, rebate and incentive offerings, attractive financing terms, and tools to help identify contractors that have been trained in energy efficiency. Additional resources help homeowners take the next steps towards saving energy. The Energy Network actually has a great program for any multifamily property owners or managers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the webinar and provide contact information for this as well. As we've heard in Part 1 and Part 2 of John Wilhoit's webinar series, there are many ways to keep tenants happy with your property. Today, he's going to address the ways that property managers can keep renters satisfied, and this happens with a discussion about why relationships are key, examining the other income category, and exploring why commodity costs continue to rise in today's market. A particularly timely topic as California continues to struggle with the worst drought in the state's history. If your renters are millennials, they're particularly sensitive to energy and water conservation, and they will form their first impressions about a property based on your choices as you make as a property owner or manager. You know, various innovative water conservation and energy efficiency solutions like passive heating, solar water heating, electric charging stations, drain water heat recovery systems, and living roofs have all begun to take hold in our cities, and they're making their ways into all parts of the state. Residents are not only soon to become better educated about resource conservation, but they will look for properties that reflect those values back to them. And as a property owner, you're in the business of creating homes for your tenants, and you can offer a healthy environment that they'll cherish, while at the same time saving yourself maintenance costs and setting an example for the larger community. As I mentioned briefly, today's presenter is John Wilhoit of Multifamily Insight. John is actually the president of Wilhoit Investment Network, LLC, an owner and asset manager of apartments, condominiums, and townhomes. His career is focused on high-volume, large-scale multifamily communities, including market rate and mixed finance developments. He's previously held positions with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, Apartment Investment Management Company, AIMCO, and the Maryland Housing Fund. John is actually also a co-founder of Powerhouse Leadership Academy, a weekly program that assists property management teams with increasing their property management fees and expanding new business development while controlling expenses. The live weekly academy focuses on maximizing net operating income and increasing the net asset value of property management companies through its leading edge GRACE, which is an acronym that stands for Grow Revenue and Control Expenses Strategy. We're going to touch a little bit about this today, and we also talked about this a little bit in Part 2, so I highly suggest you go to our YouTube channel and watch Part 2 if you're interested in that. Multifamily Insight is John's blog that provides his perspective on the world of multifamily acquisitions, management, and investing. A truly interesting website. We're going to post all this information for you to be able to visit his website, but definitely something to check out. And with that, I would like you to please join me in welcoming John Wilhoit, Jr.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think it is afternoon for most of us. Maybe not when we record it, right? But once it's online. But today we are on a sunny afternoon and looking forward to speaking with you about these cornerstone concepts in quality property management. As we mentioned, this is Part 3. We did Part 1 in, I think, April, did we not? And then Part 2 in May, and here we are in June, finishing up the series with the last 3 points. So the three particular points we're covering today are related to relationships, the other income category or ancillary income, and then a little commentary on commodity prices. So those are our 3 topics. So just tell me when we're ready for number 1, if that slide is up, please.
We are ready.
Okay, so relationships are key is the slide that you see in front of you, and we all know that that's the truth, but we don't all necessarily follow it on a continuous basis, right? But when we're talking about property management, it really is a service business. It can be considered a retail business, it can be considered a consumer services business, it can be considered a business-to-business service, because a lot of the businesses that property management companies run are businesses in and of themselves, right? Whether it's a multifamily property or a light industrial or a retail property, that is in itself a business. The real estate itself is a business, irrespective of who's acting and interacting with that property. But the relationships there are what make the business run, right? And when we talk about multifamily specifically, our residents are our customers, as is the property owner. That is also our customer. And we don't act and interact with those two groups of people the same, but yet we still do need to interact with them. So relationships are key. Yet we all know people that they just seem to be unhappy whether they're at home or at work. There's just nothing you can do to set things right with them. And those are the folks that, of course, we do our best to try to avoid, because whatever their issues are, they don't need to bring them to work. And if they work for us, that is a reflection of our company. If that attitude is a continuous reflection of our company, then that's how people will begin to see our company. So when we talk about relationships, everyone that's on your staff is a, what's the word I'm looking for, right on the tip of my tongue, an ambassador. That's the word I was looking for, an ambassador for our company. But how do they become an ambassador? They become an ambassador, number one, by being employed by us, but also based on the training that we provide to them. So if we have not provided any training, any guidance, any corporate culture, well then, how can we expect them to act the way we want them to act? So it's an absolute imperative that you imbibe your company culture as a property management company into each and every employee, because each and every employee has an opportunity to interact with your customers, those being residents in the case of multifamily, and also those being property owners, our other customer. So I wanted to point out that this is from a Wall Street Journal interview some months ago, and it was with Penny Pritzker, who's the Secretary of Commerce, and she was asked how she addresses political dysfunction, which we know is kind of a common core cause anymore, right? But the core question was about how to get around all the rhetoric, considering the constant hum of the political noise. And in part, here's her answer. Her answer was, it requires what I know from my business career, establishing relationships, establishing credibility, working hard, and making your arguments. Then look for common ground and try to move the agenda forward. So that's her perspective on what she does within that political arena, but it also applies to what we do in property management. We're often attempting to establish relationships, right, with new or potential residents. We're also attempting to establish credibility continuously with the way we act and interact with our resident customers. And what's the primary thing they're interested in? They're interested in fairness, and they're interested in on-time maintenance calls that go according to plan. So if you can be cordial and you can respond to maintenance, those are things that build significant I'm losing the word again, Leila. Trust and going forward in a relationship. So it also requires knowing your arguments. And what I mean by that is we can't be on the fly. If there's a particular method for addressing a particular problem, then that method needs to be applied consistently in the same way by all of our team members when they're acting and interacting with our customers. It cannot be off the wall. It can't be shot from the hip. It has to be according to plan. So that's where we get back to that corporate culture, right? Treating everyone the same, but yet inside of our organization, making sure everyone has the training that they can act within the public arena, and they know what the expectations of your property management company are. But yet there's different types of relationships, right? There's different types of methods that we interact with our customers. So let me just go over a few of those. So one of them is we have to have team players. And I'm going to provide you with 4 different points here if you want to write them down. So number 1 would be team players. We have to have the team players on our company side on our team that not only know what their roles are, but also know what other people do. Because even on a soccer field, everyone can't be a scorer, right? We have to have defenders. We have to have different roles that, and within that role, that person or persons need to know what our expectations are of them. But we also need the role players. So role players would be number 2. Team players that are there, role players that are there, and then cross-training that cross-pollinizes the team players and the role players, so that if a critical person within your company leaves, there's not a gaping hole. Now, granted, there may be a hole for a season, but it shouldn't be so deep that it interrupts the rest of our operation. So that's where cross-training comes in. So number 1, team players. Number 2, role players. Number 3, cross-training amongst those. And then number 4 would be the critical expertise. And if you're the person running your property management company, then you are likely the one with the critical expertise. You're the one that knows where all the players are, what they're doing. You're the one that's put them in the field, and you're the one that's there to monitor how things proceed forward. Because let's face it, right, if we're in property management, we're not there more often than not just as a nonprofit. We're there to be profitable. And so to be profitable, we have to be able to implement this team in the field and do it while we're controlling the expenses on the property management side for our very own entity, in addition to controlling expenses for our customers that own the particular property. So that's the relationships, our key category that I have. I want to add a few more points to that, Bill, if we have time, do we?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So every business is built on relationships, and the multifamily business is no different, which is what we're focusing on today. So here's the 3 places where relationships really are key within your organization. And with respect to this, there's no way out. If you fail in one of these 3, then you fail. So you have to have quality customer contact. Your representatives, your public representatives on property, on the telephone, through your web presence, they all have to have a consistent message, and they all have to deliver on the promises that you keep. Secondly, maintenance. Maintenance not only has to be responsive, but it also has to be respectful. So it does no good to show up on time if the person that shows up, it does not have the expertise to address the problem, or if they make the resident uncomfortable for whatever reason, which goes back to training. So the training for that maintenance personnel, particularly those that are going inside of the unit, they can't be the fly-by-night characters, right? We have to know who they are. And I'm referring at the moment to in-house staff, but the same is true when we're using vendors. So we need to have more than just a cursory contact with the people that we send inside the people's homes. And then lastly would be banking. And I say this is key because even as a property management company, even though we're not necessarily talking about mortgage debt, there's still a business to run, one that perhaps needs lines of credit, one that needs a banking relationship that will allow for the way that we run our business. Because let's face it, every bank is not accustomed to how property management companies run. And depending on the types of properties that you're running, there could be a 2, 5, or 10% issue with respect to NSF on a monthly basis, which is the margin that we run on sometimes, right? 2, 5, or 10%. So getting that information back into us so that we can address it as fast as possible is an absolute necessity. And some banks are not set up for that. All they want to do is send you, in the mail, a report or a statement that there was an NSF. When in our business, we can't wait 5 or 10 days to find out that information. So back to those key relationships, banking is one of those. So customer contact, who we put in the field, very important that they have the appropriate training and that they understand your corporate culture. Maintenance staff, that they are not only responsible, but respected. And I should have said responsive, responsive and respectful. And lastly, banking relationships that understand our business. So that makes it easier on us, and we can spend less time in the banking building and more time in the field and then in our office running our business. So those are the three key ones with respect to relationships. Tell me when we can move to the next slide, please.
Go for it, John.
Okay. And this is the other income category?
Yes.
Right. Well, some people refer to this as other income. Some refer to it as ancillary income. And other income or ancillary income with respect to rental property is any income derived that is not rent. So any income derived that is not rent is ancillary income. And there's various types of ancillary income, and they come in different ways, but it basically breaks down into three categories. There is straight fee income, there's referral fee income, and then there's fees for services. But let's just talk about the percentage as an example. So if you're looking at an acquisition candidate, and the other income category represents 10% of revenue, is that a good thing or a bad thing? You know, on the surface, we really can't tell because we don't know if on the surface where that fee income is coming from. Is it recurring or is it a one-time thing? Is there a seasonal difference in terms of when ancillary income bumps up, or is it pretty consistent over the course of a 12 or 24-month period? And then what type of income is it? If it's 10% other income, but yet it's all late fees, then that tells you there's probably some issues with operations, right? And not necessarily with the property. It could very well be the property management company, or it could very well be just the method with which they input things into their property management software back to training. And maybe that they just input all rents on the 10th and they all reflect rent, that rents are late, and nobody cares, and they just kind of hold it on the books that way. But I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that it happens often. So when you see that number at that 10% of revenue, it's a pretty significant number. If it's 2, 3, or 4%, that's kind of in the norm of things. So what you're going to find will likely be very vanilla. But once the number gets up above 5, then you're really going to want to devote more time to what's in there, because we don't want to buy a property that has phantom income, right? We don't want to buy a property that the reason that ancillary income is 5% is because for 3 months they did a in-home appliance that was, you know, everyone gets a free washer and dryer for 3 months, and then after that you have to pay for it, and 42% of the people kept, and the other 58% of the people gave the washer dryer back. So we're looking for consistency. We want to know that it has legs. We want to know that it has stamina. So let me give you just a few examples of different types of income. So we mentioned straight fee income, referral fee income, and fee for services. So straight fee income is represented by application fees and late fees. Those are 2 examples of straight fee income. So those are pretty normal. They should be, when they are applied professionally, exactly that. It's a straight application fee which covers cost. It's not necessarily a profit center. And late fee income, really, we want that lower than higher, because if it's higher, that means that there's a larger percentage of management time that has to go into addressing late fees and collections on rent. So late fee income being higher is not necessarily positive, because, believe me, you pay for it in reference to, yes, it looks like a larger fee on the P&L, but the time engaged in collecting rent and late fees proportionally increases as that number goes up. For referral fee income, 2 examples would be Wi-Fi and cable. And Wi-Fi and cable are 2 separate and distinct fees, and the contracts that people are signing for those now are all over the map. It's the Wild West when it comes to referral fee income on Wi-Fi and cable. So I just caution you to proceed slowly with respect to those. I've seen contracts that for $1,000 from ABC Company gives them the right to be on property for the next 30 years. And it's a one-time payment of $1,000. I've seen other contracts on commercial-sized multifamily 150 and 200 units where the payment is $50,000 for a 5 or 10-year term for exclusive rights. And then remember, those rights could be for one category or another. It could be Wi-Fi or cable. So very often it's a bundle that includes phone service. So even though we're moving away from landlines, people still have landlines. So if you're signing an agreement for your property that states that only ABC company can provide a hardwire landline on site, that could be problematic as things change in the future, because that is, as I shared, the Wild West in terms of the types of services that are being offered, the types of contracts that people let, and you just need counsel, you need professional counsel, and your attorney with respect to selecting those services for a property. The last category is fee for services, and this is becoming a larger portion of the other income or ancillary income category, based on simple things such as concierge services, dry cleaning services, those things that can be offered by local businesses that allow for a referral fee to the property. That's what the fee for service income is. Now granted, when you're letting other people on the property, you likely want to know as much about them as you possibly can, right? The same as we do for our vendors. We vet them. We want to know that they have workers' comp, that they're real, that they have a business address, not just a cell phone, in a drop box. So the same goes here when it comes to local businesses. If you're letting them on your property and you're deriving a fee, then you want to know as much about those companies as possible, so that you know them well, because it's more than just a $10 or $25 check. It's really a relationship, right? And if those relationships can be built on trust, then they have the likelihood of having a long-standing timeline, and that's good for everybody. So take your time on the front end with respect to vetting those companies that you allow to bring services on property, and it's better to have fewer than more, and just grow some deep roots with those. So that's my stanza on the other income category: straight fee income, referral fee income, and fee for services. Now, I did an audio series on this, I think maybe last year, that you can find on Multifamily Insight, and I think in there we cover 15 different categories within these three headers that just give you an opportunity to explore more than just two or three. That when it comes to other fee income or other income category, there's those that everybody knows, and then there's those that people apply. But in the interim, there is a growing number of services that are occurring. Just like we have today, how many different internet service providers, right? I mean, more than you can count, which didn't exist in as little as 10 years prior. So it's constantly changing. So don't just shut it out and think, well, it's too much work. Well, one fee category may generate 2, 3, or 4% of revenue once it's online and proceeding and going forward. So multiply your current property income times 4% and see what that number is. If that's a large enough number to get your attention, then that's a large enough number for you to take the time to see what type of ancillary income that can be provided by your existing portfolio.
Thank you.
Got to take a sip. All right. We have one more slide. Yeah? Commodity costs continue to rise. So when I'm talking about commodity costs, I'm really looking at cost of construction. And this may seem boring, but it affects all of you on this call, because the cost of a 2x4 today is not the same as the cost of a 2x4 yesterday. And yes, it's a commodity, and yes, the price goes up and down, just like oil, but yet when we build something, it has a value much longer than a particular gallon of oil that goes in our tank, gallon of gas that goes in our tank, right? So in the Midwest, it's not uncommon for the cost of construction to be approximately $100 per square foot. But when we talk about cost of construction being $100 per square foot, that excludes land costs. So take that same number and transfer it to Oakland or San Jose, or Santa Barbara. Cost of construction is more closely like $200 per square foot because there's a higher cost of operation there. That the 2x4 may cost the same, but everything that we wrap around that 2x4 in a higher cost market is what increases the cost of construction. So the 2x4 is $8, but the labor required to install that 2x4 in framing is $1. And then we have the cost of insurance on top of that, which is another $1. And then we have the cost of administrative and overhead or general contracting costs, which is another $1.50. So I'm using the 2x4 as a simplistic example, but just recognize that the cost of construction today has an impact on the value at some point in the future. And what I mean by that is, if you look at an appraisal, and I'm just going to say the vanilla appraisal, an appraisal will often have three types of value that it provides for a property, right? It's always three. It's market rate, it's new construction, and then it's replacement. So with that, they always go back to cost of construction. So an appraisal for a property that's at $1 million may have a replacement cost of $1.2 million. So even though the value of the property, the market rate, is $1 million, if you went to build that building again, it would cost $1.2 million to build the building. So that seems pretty straightforward, right? The cost of construction is higher, so therefore, that's what it costs and that's what it costs. That's what those 2x4s and everything else around it, from plumbing to HVAC to wiring to foundation work, it's all $1.2 million. But the value is only $1 million. But again, that excludes the cost of the land. So when you look at cost of construction, when you look at commodity cost, just recognize that that cost number that's being thrown out there does not include the dirt. And that's so very important in high-cost markets. And when you look at insurances, as an example, all different types, they all go back to Marshall and Swift, many of them do, in reference to the cost of construction. And that cost of construction is based on what? The cost of the commodities in the current day market less the cost of the land. Again, I know I keep coming back to the same thing, but I just want to impress upon you that the cost of construction is a number that is separate and distinct from the market value and what the actual value or the actual cost would be to duplicate that same building. So we're all aware of markets that have 50-year-old buildings, right? I mean, I can think of some that are even in Ventura County, single-family homes. They're not necessarily clapboard homes, but they're older homes. And they have a value of several $100,000, as an example. But if you were to go and try to rebuild that house, of course you couldn't. The systems are outdated. You really wouldn't put in, radiator heaters anymore, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So in that particular case, the cost of construction for replacement is really irrelevant because you're not going to go back unless you're doing a period piece or you're using historic tax credits on a larger deal. You're not really trying to rebuild the existing. So we have to segregate cost of construction from the value of the land that's underneath it and then apply those two together for getting an estimate of value for replacement. But yet remember, that is different than the market value because the market value on rental property is really only cares about what's it worth based on what's it bringing in. They don't care about the cost of construction, right? I can think of a building now that the replacement cost is $4.2 million. The actual value of the property is about $3 million. So there's often a disconnect. It can certainly be more than that 20% I mentioned earlier. But I just want to impress upon you that that 2x4 has a value that is valued differently depending on how you're looking at it. And that's what I wanted to impress upon our audience for commodity costs. They continue to rise, but that doesn't necessarily mean the cost, or excuse me, the value of the building continues to rise, because the value of the building is based upon the rental income derived and the net operating income, not necessarily the cost of that 2x4. That's a separate way of looking at a particular property.
Great. Thank you, John. So what we're going to do now is let all that information digest for a moment. We're going to open up the session to any questions that you have. They can be specific to the 3 topics that John pressed upon today. They can be about past webinar series that we've also talked about, or just really any questions you have about property management and things that come up along the way. And while we wait for questions to roll in, we highly suggest that you take advantage of this time with John to get these questions answered. But I am going to let you guys know a little bit more, as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, about the Energy Network's multifamily program while we wait for questions to roll in. For multifamily property owners and managers like some of you in our audience, the Energy Network multifamily program is a fantastic resource. It provides significant rebates and technical assistance to help you complete energy and water upgrades to your buildings. And this program offers rebates for windows, lighting, HVAC, appliances, water fixtures, plenty of other things, small and big, that you can do to improve your property. And you get up to $1,200 per unit, and which is a great incentive. And some benefits of these are lowering your operating costs, increasing your property value, and improving tenant retention. If you want to learn more about the Energy Network multifamily program, you can visit theenergynetwork.com or give us a call at 949-264-2062. We'll be able to answer any questions you have, and you can get down to the nitty-gritty technical questions and specifics to your buildings and tenants. This webinar series has been co-sponsored by Greenpoint Rated, which is the leading green home certification system in California, with more than 31,000 homes certified, including multifamily properties. Actually, more and more multifamily properties are being certified. Greenpoint Rated is a simple, affordable, and flexible rating system used by countless builders and developers. It assures residents that a building is healthier, more comfortable, durable, and resource efficient. We also take into effect community design, indoor air quality, things that might not get noticed so much in other programs. The Greenpoint Rated team is comprised of leading green building experts, and they help put together this webinar series and set the agenda for which sustainability topics are most relevant to multifamily developers and managers like you. By visiting buildagreen.org/greenpoint-rated, you will find a multifamily checklist to see what kind of upgrades are factored into a Greenpoint Rated certification. And I promise you, you might be a little bit surprised about which measures are rather easy to achieve. Also, there are always educational events such as workshops, webinars, and trainings for you to learn more about energy and resource efficient upgrades. Some upcoming webinars that we have you might find beneficial are hot water on-demand recirculation controls, low-cost retrofits to save energy, especially with the drought in mind here. That's going to be a July 9th webinar, and you can register by highlighting this link here or visiting the buildagreen.org webpage and looking at the upcoming events. Additionally, some of you may have been registered. We had a water conservation and multifamily buildings webinar scheduled earlier in the year. It just got rescheduled for August 10th. We'd love for you to join that as well. Again, with water and the drought being heavy on our minds, it might be beneficial for you to come and learn some tips and tricks regarding that, and definitely some more code updates that have been implemented this year. Again, I'm going to open it up to questions. If you guys have any questions right now, it doesn't look like anyone's submitting any questions, John, but we definitely highly encourage it. He's available to answer any questions that you have. While we do this, I'm going to bring up the information for John. This is his Multifamily Insight blog. You find that at www.multifamilyinsight.net. I'd mentioned this earlier. Also, visit his website, Wilhoit Investment Network, at www.win-rei.com. And John, you had mentioned earlier, did you want to talk about a seminar that's upcoming up and maybe let our listeners know a little bit about that?
Sure. Most all of my work is with property management companies and entities But in this fall, for September 19th, we're looking to do a one-day seminar on real estate wealth building in St. Louis. And if you go to multifamilyinsight.net and to send me an email, I can tell you more about that as we spin that up. We really haven't even started any advertising for that yet, but we have set the date for September 19th in St. Louis, and it will be one day specific to real estate wealth building. Some of the information we've covered here will fall into the information we provide there, but our real focus there will be on building wealth with your existing portfolio and portfolio building, meaning going from smaller portfolio into a larger portfolio appropriately. So there won't be any information related to knocking down deals. We won't be talking about house flipping. It's really about real estate wealth building and doing it from the ground up appropriately for sustainability.
Great. I hope if anyone is interested in that, definitely check out multifamilyinsight.net to find out more information about that. We'll also include some information in our bi-weekly newsletters as the date and information for this training seminar, I should say, gets finalized. I'd like to thank John Wilhoit for joining us for this three-part series. It's been really great to have him as a resource, to be able to answer any questions that you guys have coming up, and to be able to provide different insight on looking at multifamily buildings and really what's key to cornerstone concepts for quality property management. Here I have on the screen John's email in case you want to email him directly. You can also contact us and we can get you in contact with him. I have his phone number posted, and again his website, www.win-rei.com. John, I'd like to thank you for joining us every month. It's been a great pleasure working with you. You've been a really great presenter and really informational and expertise definitely in the field.
Great, thank you. My pleasure.
And then if anyone has any questions about the Energy Network Multifamily Program, here's a contact information for David Myers, our Southern California Regional Director, and his email and phone number, as well as Jonathan Austin, our Multifamily Sales and Outreach Program Manager, who maybe some of you guys have talked to before. But they will have any answers to any questions that you have regarding the program, incentives, and rebates. Again, I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining us. It's been a great afternoon. I'm going to leave the webinar open for a little bit longer if any last-minute questions come in, but it looks like our audience has no questions. So hopefully you guys can go out there, promote the program, maybe get yourselves enrolled, and start getting rebates, and then create those healthier, resource-efficient homes for your tenants. Again, thank you, John, for joining us, and thank you all for attending the webinar today.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.